So what makes me cranky about John Wick, Chapter 2? Stupid bad guys. Seriously, how dumb do you gotta be to cross a guy who is internationally known for being so lethal that if you had to kill the boogeyman, you'd call him? The first movie solved this problem by making the situation a series of unfortunate mistakes by a kid who's just too spoiled to know any better, but the people in this movie know exactly who he is. They talk about him like he's the personification of death, or the devil himself. So what kind of idiot is gonna go to that guy and say, hey, I know you wanted to retire and all, but you're gonna do this job for me, or else? And then when he says no, actually follow through on the or else. Couldn't you just call the second deadliest assassin instead of pissing off the guy who just got done exterminating an entire branch of the Russian mafia because the son of the guy running it stole his car and killed his dog? And at what point does the average everyday henchman take one look at the bodies John Wick has left in his wake and just say, okay, screw that, I quit, you're on your own, man? I can kind of understand the other assassins wanting to take the gig because of the ego factor, I'm gonna be the guy to kill John Wick. But red shirt number 35 presumably wants to go home to his wife and kids, and yet he still charges right around the corner to his unceremonious and gloriously gruesome end right next to the last 34 guys. I'm not kidding about the body count either. John Wick kills so many people, I'm pretty sure they ran out of stuntmen because they all started to look suspiciously familiar by the end. In fact, I think the last half dozen might have all been actually the same guy. But that's okay, because watching them get taken out is incredibly satisfying, due in no small part to the fact that you can actually see what's going on. Just like the first movie, the action sequences are full of wonderfully long takes from a nice, steady, wide position so that you never feel confused as to what's happening. Despite the fact that there are a ton of similarly dressed people coming in waves, I think I only lost sight of who was where a couple times in the entire movie, which is pretty impressive given the sheer number of fights this movie has. That was one of the things that made the original John Wick such a delightful surprise, and they easily could have taken a bigger budget and gone all Jason Bourne on it by adding all that hyper-edited shaky cam garbage that every action movie thinks it needs these days, but they didn't, and I love them for that. I'm assuming that's because director Chad Stahelski comes from a stunt background, so he's probably seen firsthand just how stupid it is for a stunt team to go to all that trouble of designing intricate fight sequences only to have them completely obscured by the director handing the cameras over to cocaine-fueled hamsters. I'm sure it helps that Keanu Reeves clearly puts in the work so that he can do the stunts, as we saw in that viral YouTube video of him at the gun course. Equal parts beautiful and brutal, these fight sequences and shootouts are even longer and more complex than the already excellent ones in the first movie, so kudos to Keanu for having that dedication to make this look good. John Wick Chapter 2 also proves that you can do that and still create a pretty stylized movie. There are plenty of times where it has some creative camera work and editing, it just never interferes with your ability to follow what's on the screen. Plus, they do a great job of mixing up locations and giving the stuff that isn't part of the mass murder some flair, right down to the subtitles having mixed fonts and colors. The other thing that made John Wick so awesome was how it established its main character as a badass before he actually did anything. What they did was so good, it ranks up there with things like Darth Vader demonstrating the Force choke for the first time. Obviously, that's something pretty hard to top for a sequel, but they certainly try by expanding on the underground world of assassins that was hinted at in the first movie and having all of these people recognize John on sight and have the same kind of reaction to him that the Russian mob boss did in the first one. They're really able to sell that this guy can single-handedly take on an army of goons and hired assassins. Of course, if you wanted to nitpick, you could say his prowess is just due to the fact that he's almost indestructible and has a suit that's literally bulletproof. But even if he survives things that should at least put him in the hospital, they still make it a point to show him take damage, so he isn't just straight up invincible. Another thing I liked was how it avoided a couple of very familiar cliches. There were a couple of moments here that would have gone very differently if this was your typical action flick, and not doing that is what keeps this admittedly very simple plot much more interesting than it really has any right to be. Basically, John Wick 2 is everything you could possibly hope for in a sequel. It's similar, but not identical to the first movie. It expands upon its universe. It manages to do some of what the original did, only bigger and better than the original did. It brings back some of the more interesting characters from the first one, but without sort of shoehorning them in just for a cameo. And it doesn't fall into the typical pitfalls that show up when bigger budgets and more attention make people forget what made the first film fun. It even adds some pretty good humor, particularly when we get the Matrix reunion with Keanu and Lawrence Fishburne. There's even some good funny exchanges with the new antagonists, who are played by Common and Ruby Rose, who seem like they did their own stunts too, so if they did, definite props to them as well as Keanu for just making a really interesting series of fight sequences that are easy to follow and a lot of fun. So if you like the first one, or you like action movies in general, this one's definitely worth a trip to the theater. If you haven't seen the first one, they do a quick recap at the beginning, woven into John demonstrating his badassery once again. So while I absolutely think you should see John Wick for how good it is, you should be able to enjoy Chapter 2 without actually having seen Chapter 1. That's what I thought about John Wick Chapter 2 anyway, and I'd love to hear what you think about it or its predecessor in the comments below. And don't forget, if you want to have a safe haven at the International Underground Dinosaur Assassin Hotel chain, likes on my videos are our only accepted currency, and you'll need to subscribe to my channel in order to be considered a member in good standing. So before you head out to get revenge on somebody who did you wrong, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons.